Hello, everyone. It's nice to see you all, and thank you for joining us. Today's webinar is a joint collaboration between the Cambridge Interfaith Program and Project Noon. I am Saad Ismail, editor of Project Noon, an Indian based forum dedicated to critically and creatively exploring Hindu Muslim dialogue. Allow me to briefly introduce today's event. The webinar is an introduction to Hindu worldviews by Dr. Ankur Barua, senior lecturer in Hindu studies at Cambridge University. His primary research interests are Vedantic Hindu philosophical theology and Indo-Islamic styles of sociality. He is the author of several books, most recently Exploring Hindu Philosophy, as well as The Hindu Self and Its Muslim Neighbors, Contested Borderlines on Bengali Landscapes, which translates for the first time a series of writings by Rabindranath Tagore on the Hindu-Muslim question, while situating the contours of evolving interactions between the two communities in the history of Bengal. Now, today's event will also introduce an extended series of lectures that Dr. Barua will deliver in the month of August. To be clear, today's webinar and the following lecture series are aimed at the modest endeavor of understanding Hindu religious traditions and worldviews. This aim is modest compared to the more ambitious and robust activity of making significant comparisons between Hindu and Muslim traditions. This ambitious project will be version 2.0 of our present efforts. But before we may start making comparative assessments, we will have to take a deep plunge into one of these two oceans at a time. First, understanding Hindu worldviews. Second, independently understanding Muslim worldviews. And finally, beginning to make meaningful points of contrast and comparison between the two. So before we make any meaningful comments of agreement or disagreement, we must first understand things for what they are. This is the heart of what is known as the phenomenological method in the academic study of religion. It is also at the heart of the Prophet Muhammad's prayer, "My Lord, show me things for what they are, reality for what it is." This is the spirit in which we hope to proceed. One final remark about the August lecture series. They will consist of presentations by Dr. Barua on various aspects of Hindu traditions, followed by a 10 to 15-minute response from a respondent, who could be either a Muslim or a non-Muslim, a scholar or a non-scholar. So if you're interested in becoming a respondent for one of the August sessions, let me know by getting in touch via the contact form on the Project Noon website, which can be found at projectnoon.in/contact. Additionally, to attend the event in August and receive the details of the meeting, prior registration is required at the Cambridge Interfaith Program website, the link to which will be shared in the description box below. Now, without any further ado, I ask Dr. Barua to offer his presentation of 30 minutes or so, following which we will have an open Q&A.
Hello everyone. I welcome all of you to this webinar. In the next 35 minutes or so, I will introduce you to the 10 online weekend lectures on Hinduism that I will give in August and tell you why I am giving these lectures in the first place. Thereafter, you can ask me any questions you may have about these lectures and more generally about Hindu-Muslim relations. Let me begin by saying that at the Faculty of Divinity, University of Cambridge, where I am based, I mostly research and give lectures on various philosophical, socio-religious, and socio-political dimensions of Hindu worldviews. I add mostly because a significant proportion of my academic publications relates to comparative engagements with Christian doctrine and in recent years with Indo-Islamic spiritual visions. On this occasion, I will keep to one side these comparative intellectual exercises. Let me explain what I mean when I say that I research and give lectures on Hindu worldviews. You would have noted that the description of the lecture series contains the phrase "for Muslim audiences." That is, these 10 lectures constitute an introduction to Hinduism for individuals from Muslim backgrounds. Initially, I considered dropping that phrase. On reflection, however, I concluded that given that my long-range objective in giving these 10 lectures is to raise the quality and the level of mutual intelligibility across Hindu-Muslim borderlines, I should let it remain. Here are two reasons. The first has to do with a certain style of studying or teaching religion in academic contexts, and the second relates to my religious affiliations or subjectivities. Let me begin with the first reason. You may have watched the video where I introduce this webinar and the 10 lectures. As I indicate there in lecture 1, I will outline a methodology of critical sympathy in the study of religion. Now, this point relating to methodology is so crucial that I have decided to spend some time outlining it today so that when we get to the lectures in August, I can direct audiences to this discussion or ask them to revisit it. If you are not a student of what is called the academic study of religion, you may be surprised or perplexed or astounded to hear that you do not have to be a practicing Hindu to teach Hinduism, a practicing Muslim to teach Islam, and so on. Note that I do not say you cannot be. Instead, I say you do not have to be. That is, I do not say you cannot be a practicing Hindu and teach Hinduism, or you cannot be a practicing Muslim and teach Islam. Instead, I say you do not have to be a practicing Hindu in order to teach Hinduism, and you do not have to be a practicing Muslim in order to teach Islam, and likewise with respect to Buddhism, Christianity, Judaism, and so on. Now, in many parts of South Asia and many other parts of the world, pretty much the only reason why you would study a religious tradition is because you are already a member or follower of the tradition and because you think that the study will enhance your ability to see the world through the prism of that tradition. Having said that, a basic presupposition of the academic study of religion is that a scholar can begin to cultivate the virtue of critical sympathy in which the scholar engages with a religious tradition from multiple perspectives, such as historical, sociological, anthropological, scriptural, and philosophical. Let me highlight the phrase critical sympathy. If you are hearing it for the first time, you may think it contains a logical contradiction. You may ask yourself, can I be critical about something or someone if I am sympathetic towards that thing or person? Conversely, can I be sympathetic if I am critical? I would like to think that in our different ways, we are all familiar with contexts where we have indeed exercised some measure of critical sympathy. For instance, when John Smith, a friend, tells us that through such and such a pathway, he has developed such and such a habit, we may critically advise John to break out of this habit even as we sympathize with him. On the one hand, we do not simply denounce John as stupid or irrational or perverse. On the other hand, we may indicate to John why we think his habit is injurious to his psychosomatic well-being. That is, with John, we seek to walk on the difficult middle path between downright condemnation and unreflective approval. You can see why I characterize this discipline, cognitive as much as existential, as a virtue. One becomes more and more skillful in adopting or inhabiting critical sympathy through an ongoing practice. To turn from our friend John to a religious tradition such as Hinduism, Islam, or Christianity, to study such a tradition from the standpoint of critical sympathy is to begin to situate oneself on its horizons from a range of scholarly perspectives by avoiding two positions. The first position is a form of romanticization in which you would declare a particular religious tradition to be the greatest thing ever in the world that contains ready-made solutions to all human problems and leave it at that. Now, there will be no problem, at least according to me, in adopting this position in a specific context, such as a church, mosque, temple, gathering of friends or relatives, and so on. But with respect to the virtue that I am highlighting, this position is not sufficiently critical. For instance, it does not tell us that this religious tradition has been the site of multiple readings or interpretations, that this religious tradition has been interrogated or even reworked in diverse ways by its own followers, that this religious tradition seems to have engaged with changing social circumstances in seemingly contradictory ways, and so on. Let's move to the second position, which is the polar opposite. This is a form of demonization in which you would denounce a particular religious tradition as completely devoid of any spiritual substance, existential significance, or moral gravity. With respect to the virtue that I am highlighting, this position is not sufficiently sympathetic or empathetic. Instead, By reading the key scriptural texts of this religious tradition alongside its members, by observing how its members grapple with everyday complexities relating to love, hope, loss, and dying, and so on, one may begin to discern some dimensions of meaning or value in it. Note that I say may begin and not will begin. Critical sympathy is not an established fact, but an ongoing practice. Now, here are three concrete examples of scholarly perspectives with respect to the study of Hinduism, which require or presuppose some measure of critical sympathy. Number one, you may wish to study through a philosophical lens how the relation between the human self and the divine self, or to put it more directly, between the human soul and God, is worked out in Hindu scriptures. Number two, you may wish to explore through a historical lens in what ways the concept of sacrifice or prayer or meditation has shifted between 1500 BCE and 1500 CE. And number three, you may wish to understand through a sociological lens how some foundational Hindu texts represent the geopolitical or cultural outsider. Next, here are three concrete examples of scholarly perspectives with respect to the study of Christianity, which require or presuppose some measure of critical sympathy. Number one, you may wish to study through a philosophical lens the mainline Christian claim that Jesus Christ is one person with two natures, divine and human. Number two, you may wish to explore through a historical lens how the concept of just war has developed from St. Augustine in the 5th century to St. Thomas Aquinas in the 13th century to our times. Number three, you may wish to investigate through a sociological lens the intersections or oppositions between Christian values and modes of social protest in contemporary Latin America. Hopefully, by now you would appreciate the point that regarding the academic study of religion, the fundamental criterion is not whether you are a member of a certain religious tradition, but whether you are cultivating a certain style of critical sympathy. For instance, many of my students at the Faculty of Divinity come from Christian backgrounds and they may or may not be practicing Christians. When such a student writes a solid essay on a certain Hindu conceptual constellation or spiritual practice, this thought will never come to my mind. Oh my God, that is a very good essay for someone who is a Christian. This is because what matters in this specifically academic context is not what one's ultimate faith commitments are or are not, but whether someone has paid careful attention to the source texts, read these materials in constructive dialogue with the recent scholarship, watched some YouTube videos or clips from Bollywood movies where a certain ritual is presented, spent some time in a Hindu temple in London or Delhi, talked to some Hindu neighbors or friends, and so on. At this stage, let me remind you and myself what I am doing here. I am outlining some reasons, two reasons, why the description of the lecture series says for Muslim audiences. As you can see, in one sense, the sense being the standpoint of critical sympathy, these lectures are not limited to Muslim audiences. The academic content of these 10 lectures in August should be accessible to people from any background, Muslim, Hindu, Christian, Buddhist, Jewish, agnostic, and so on. However, the first reason why I have kept that phrase is because there is a specific cognitive deficit with respect to the understanding of Hinduism and equally the understanding of Islam across many Hindu-Muslim borderlines. In a book titled Two Cultures and the Scientific Revolution in 1959, C.P. Snow famously lamented the lack of mutual intelligibility across certain institutionalized divides between the sciences and the humanities. The heart of Snow's lament, that even the language of everyday use in one group is incomprehensible to the other group, can be resituated across many Hindu and Muslim spaces. A constellation of diverse socio-political factors, such as the non-inclusion of religion as a category of scholarly study in institutions of higher education, the inheritance of divisive cultural memories, and so on, has generated or reinforced a culture of apathy, suspicion, or hostility. Characterizing this culture is a general unfamiliarity with basic Islamic idioms such as Tawhid, Namaz, and Tasawwuf, and basic Hindu idioms such as Atman, Dharma, and Samsara. One of the greatest paradoxes regarding the category of religion in South Asia is the following. On the one hand, depending on what you mean by the term religion, you will find religion everywhere. On the other hand, however, religion is not, generally speaking, a topic of careful, informed, and methodical inquiry. In other words, even though religion is seemingly omnipresent in South Asia, many people are hesitant to directly engage with it or even acknowledge its presence. Shaping this paradox is the presumption, and this is a presumption which embodies an anxiety that the only reason why someone would discuss a religious viewpoint with you is to indoctrinate you. And yet, the bread and butter of my everyday academic life comprises numerous ongoing conversations about religion with students from various religious backgrounds, Christian, Jewish, or Muslim, or none at all. Against this backdrop, in these 10 lectures, I seek to raise the level and the quality of religious literacy vis-a-vis some core theological visions, ritual practices, spiritual disciplines, and social institutions. These 10 lectures do not presuppose any acquaintance with Hindu beliefs and practices and are open to anyone with internet accessibility. Each lecture aimed at a horizon of translation will be followed by a reflection offered by a scholar of Islam or by an activist working on Hindu-Muslim relations at the grassroots. Hopefully, these 10 lectures will be followed by another series of 10 lectures on Islam to be given by various scholars of Islam. Let me spell out my long-distance vision of the impact of these two series of lectures. 10 years from today, that is in 2033, an individual from a Muslim background, let's call her Amina, will give a lecture on Hinduism at Benares Hindu University, and the audience, consisting mainly of Hindu scholars, will be deeply impressed by her depth of critical understanding and sympathetic familiarity with respect to Hindu social religious systems. Again, 10 years from today, an individual from a Hindu background, let's call her Bhakti, will give a lecture on Islam at Aligarh Muslim University, and the audience, consisting mainly of Muslim scholars, will be deeply impressed by her depth of critical understanding and sympathetic familiarity with respect to Islamic social religious systems. Will this indeed happen in 2033? If I'm still around in 2033, will I indeed get to hear two such lectures? I hope I will. So you may think of my exercise of giving 10 lectures in August as part of the groundwork towards enabling or promoting a culture where Hindus and Muslims would have the confidence to ask and negotiate difficult questions, as we call them. One of the many reasons why the cultivation of critical sympathy is so vital to the academic study of religion is that it generates as well as sustains an intellectual ethos in which people can raise difficult questions and engage with them in a thoughtful, informed, and systematic manner. For instance, with respect to South Asia, if I were to start talking about the relation between religion and violence, religion and conversion, religion and social stratification, religion and nationalism, religion and revolution, and so on, some of you may feel anxious or hesitant or perturbed because these themes are, as we say, highly sensitive or even toxic. At the same time, the fact of the matter is that I routinely have such discussions with students and colleagues. Once you accept certain basic rules of engagement, such as giving reasons for one's claims, trying to substantiate one's claims with various types of evidence, and so on, these rules become the parameters guiding the unfolding conversation. In these 10 lectures, I will not directly undertake such conversations, but hopefully I will be able to give you the basic idioms so that you feel confident to discuss difficult questions across Hindu-Muslim borderlines with people around you. At present, there are various structural impediments on the pathway of fostering understanding across these Hindu-Muslim borderlines. By structural impediments, I mean socio-economic and socio-cultural asymmetries or inequalities that we have inherited from the last 200 years or the last 500 years in different regions of South Asia. These inheritances shaping differential access to basic resources in the fields of primary education, Medical care, employment in government services, and so on constitute some of the most challenging roadblocks to negotiate on a pathway towards comprehension or intelligibility. Often these contexts of real-world asymmetry become active sites for the generation of misrepresentations of the other based on limited knowledge. We do not know, and we do not care to know, and we do not even realize that we have reached a stage where we do not care to know. In this way, a vicious feedback spiral is generated. On the one hand, conditions of material inequality are conducive to the generation of misrepresentations, and on the other hand, such misrepresentations are invoked to endorse or legitimize existing conditions of material inequality. In a way, this tragic dialectic is not limited to Hindus and Muslims in South Asia. One could even say that the global history of humanity indicates that we are competing, often with brutal violence, for scarce goods, on a fragile planet with limited resources. In these 10 lectures, I will not even try to directly solve this problem of cosmic proportions, but hopefully I will be able to impress on you how crucial it is to circumvent the vicious loop between structural inequality and individual misrepresentation. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes, all it takes to circumvent this vicious loop is, as we say, to walk a few miles in the shoes of the other person, because when you do so, you begin to understand why the person does walk in that somewhat peculiar or strange manner. This does not mean that you too have to start walking in that way, but when you're able to place yourself on another person's horizon, you may see some aspects of your humanity reflected in or embodied by that person. Underlying this image is a certain topic, namely the politics of friendship, to which I often return in my academic publications. What type of friendship, if any, is possible across individuals, across groups, across communities who inhabit sociocultural backdrops structured by forms of hierarchy, inequality, and oppression? I raise this question with the hope that you will reflect on it. Let me return to a point I made at the beginning. Namely, in the academic study of religion, you do not have to be a practicing Hindu to teach Hinduism, and you do not have to be a practicing Muslim to teach Islam. But this is not to say that you cannot be a practicing Hindu if you are teaching Hinduism, and this is not to say that you cannot be a practicing Muslim if you are teaching Islam. Let me now ask a question about moving across religious borderlines. If you are a practicing Hindu, what reason may you have to try to become someone like Bhakti? And if you are a practicing Muslim, what reason may you have to try to become someone like Amina? In these 10 lectures, I will not directly address this question relating to transversal movement across Hindu-Muslim borderlines, but my hope is that if you are a practicing Muslim, you will be able to return to a particular verse in the Quran and envision Hindu-Muslim engagements through a tafsir in a different light. And if you are a practicing Hindu, you will be able to return to a particular verse in the Upanishads or the Bhagavad Gita and envision Hindu-Muslim engagements through a bhashya in a different light. In these 10 lectures, I will not tell you precisely how to undertake this cross-border enterprise, but if I can be a catalyst for such an enterprise, that would bring me great joy. And that brings me to my second reason for keeping the phrase for Muslim audiences in the title. Generally speaking, I do not ask my students about their religious affiliation, and generally speaking, my students do not ask me about my religious affiliation. To use the language of Hollywood movies, in the academic study of religion, generally speaking, one discusses one's religious affiliation on a strictly need-to-know basis. However, as it so happens, I sometimes give lectures on Hinduism to students at a Christian seminary and a Muslim institution in Cambridge. And I'm aware that in these pedagogic settings, I unwittingly generate an asymmetry. I know quite a lot about the religious affiliations of my audience, but my audience does not know anything about mine. So on this occasion, let me tell you in the mode of FYI, for your information, that in my self-understanding, I am some kind of a Roman Catholic. When people hear this description, they usually have two questions. Number one, what on earth is that? And number two, how on earth did you become that? Without launching out into deep autobiographical territory, I will outline 2 responses and indicate their significance for the 10 lectures. Here is the first response. The negative way to present the description some kind of a Roman Catholic is as follows. If tomorrow the Vatican were to summon me to present an account of my Catholicism, my confession will not pass the relevant tests. To put it bluntly, from the Vatican's point of view, I am a heretic, and in a way, I am okay with that. The positive way to present the description some kind of a Roman Catholic is as follows. My guru, my murshid, is the 13th century Catholic Saint Francis, and I will skip some crucial details and tell you that when I was 21 years old, I took a vow in front of an icon of Saint Francis to dedicate my life to translating across the borderlines of Christians, Hindus, and Muslims. And that brings me to the second response. When my Hindu mother died when I was a teenager, I was consumed by this question. What happens to people who die without responding in faith to the Christian gospel? For almost 3 decades now, I have grappled in one way or another with this most magnificent question. And yet I am none the wiser. And across all these years, I have found myself slipping further and further away from the official teachings of the Catholic Church, hence the description of myself as some kind of a Catholic. Now here's the crucial question. Why am I telling you all this? I indicated to you that one significant hurdle on the pathway of Hindu-Muslim understanding is the persistence of some long-range dimensions of material inequality. My 10 lectures in themselves cannot remove or counteract this inequality. Another equally significant hurdle on this pathway is the question of what happens to those individuals who are not able, for whatever reason, to respond to the preaching of Islam. This hurdle turns up, of course, as much in Christian-Muslim dialogue as in Hindu-Muslim dialogue, but from the perspectives of these 10 lectures, I'm more interested in the latter than in the former. So one reason why I have answered a question that would, generally speaking, not be put to me by my own students at the Faculty of Divinity is this. I wish to place all my cards on the interreligious table and tell you that regarding such cosmological questions of an individual's post-mortem destiny, I have nothing to declare but my ignorance. Here is another reason. Across the theological universes of Hindus and Muslims, of Muslims and Christians, and of Hindus and Christians, there are, as we know, some fundamental conflicts of truth claims. Is reincarnation real? Did Jesus truly die on the cross? Does God have one unique incarnation or many avatars? Is our common human nature corrupted by some radical defect, or is our common human nature pure in its intrinsic depth? Can we meaningfully speak of some form of distinction in the being of God without this distinction implying some mode of polytheism? I take these types of truth claims seriously, so seriously indeed that, as I just indicated, I have spent almost 3 decades studying them. Now, one question which my students indeed put to me is this. Given that Hindus, Muslims, and Christians sometimes have such significant divergences in their truth claims, how do you live with this epistemic diversity? After 30 years of wrestling with God, my one-word answer is simply this: patience. I have resigned myself to the possibility that I will not know the truth with the fullness that my heart passionately desires on this side of the grave or on this shore of the cremation ghat. And so I must wait as patiently as I can for the other side or shore to arrive one day. Now, I do not offer this response in a prescriptive mode to tell you what you should believe. If you are a practicing Muslim, what you do believe regarding such matters would be shaped by your reflective engagements with the words of the Quran and the Sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad, just as if you are a practicing Hindu, what you do believe regarding such matters may be shaped by the instructions of your guru, who has conveyed to you the teachings of the Upanishads and the Bhagavad Gita. This set of motives is called epistemic peer conflict, and it will possibly come up in the Q&A during the 10 lectures. 2 verses of his song from the Bollywood movie Umrao Jaan summarize my entire academic career. They are the quintessence of all the books and articles I have published and all the lectures I have given. Justaju jiski thi, usko to na paya humne, is बहाने से मगर देख ली दुनिया हमने. The one whom I desired I did not find, yet on this pretext I got to see the whole world. In this case, the one I desired, namely the answer to the question about my Hindu mother, I have not found, at least not so far. But as a result of setting out on this journey, I got to see the many worlds of Christians, Hindus, and Muslims. Having laid out some methodological contours and indicated some tools with which we may navigate religious universes, let me turn to the question of thematic content. What will I discuss in these 10 lectures? After outlining some key notions from the paradigmatic scriptural foundations, the Vedas, roughly 1500 BCE, and the Upanishads, roughly 800 BCE, I will highlight the centrality of the Bhagavad Gita, roughly 200 CE, to many Hindu understandings of the interrelations between the human self, the natural world, and the divine reality. I will sketch some commentatorial developments of these themes, roughly 8th century CE onwards, in Vedantic visions, and explore how these visions complexly intersect with patterns of social stratification, styles of aesthetic creativity, and imaginations of the ideal polity. Here is an overview of the 10 lectures. Lectures 1 to 3, an introduction to a methodology of critical sympathy in the study of religion. B, the social cultural and the social religious meanings of the word Hindu. C, Vedic ritual imaginations of the world as a sacrificial order, Yajna Dharma. And D, the motive of self-knowledge, Jnana Vidya in the Upanishads. Lecture 4, an introduction to the central themes of the Bhagavad Gita. Lectures 5 to 6, an introduction to Vedantic notions of the human self, Jiva Atman, and its relation to the divine reality, Brahman Ishvara. Lecture 7 to 8, an introduction to the divine feminine, Devi Shakti, and an exploration of the locations of Hindu spirituality on everyday landscape structured by distinctions of caste, Varna, Jati, and gender, Sridharma. Lectures 9 to 10, an introduction to the multiple styles of post-1757 Hindu worldviews, which have sought to revoke pre-modern scriptural texts and practices in active engagement with the idea of the West. In conclusion, let me say that I hope to see many of you in August, and I look forward to engaging with the questions that you may have after each lecture. These lectures are a complete package in which I will present certain themes in the form of an unfolding narrative. This means that a subsequent lecture will make sense to someone if they have attended the previous lecture or lectures too. However, for various reasons, some people may be able to attend only a few of these lectures, and that would be fine too. Thank you.